Hello, my name is Cassidy Esch. I'm an elementary education major, a freshman, and I'm from Lagodi, Indiana.
I am Elizabeth Bogle. I am a secondary English education major. Um, I'm from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I am a senior.
Elizabeth, how did you end up in this class?
I ended up in this class, first of all, because obviously, like, it's required to graduate. But I thought it was really important to take this semester because of the contemporary American civilization focus. And the way Bartlett wanted to teach it was with a focus on Black Lives Matter. And I think that's really important right now.
What did you expect coming into this class? Like, what did you think was going to happen?
I think what I expected most of all was kind of like a white savior thing, because this university does have a lot of white kids, especially in the honors college. So I expected like a lot of like people being like, "This is how we can solve this," and like I wasn't really looking forward to it. But I think with everything that we read, like I think that was kind of resolved. But I definitely did not expect that from the get-go.
Yeah. So, what was your hometown like?
Um, I think Fort Wayne is an interesting city because they call it a big city with small town charm. But unfortunately, like with that small town charm, like especially in Indiana, you do get like some bad connotations because it is the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
So there are prejudices. I went to a Catholic grade school and high school. So I definitely I knew like two people of color growing up. Like there were people there. It was Fort Wayne, but like I didn't see anything really. Like it was kind of just like a big city with a lot of white people, unless you were on the south side of town.
So, did you think about race at all growing up?
Um, for to an extent, yes. Since there were only like two people of color throughout the Catholic grade school and high school, and there were questions like, why are these the only two I know? Like there were questions like that. But I don't think I ever really like thought about it in depth because like since it's Catholic school and you're paying to go there, like obviously they were wealthy. Um, so like I didn't like have any questions like why are there injustices? Why are there inequalities here?
Mm-hmm. When people around you talked about race, what were those conversations like, or were there any conversations like that you remember?
Um, they definitely started when I went to high school. Um, but I don't think any of them were like good, fruitful conversations. Because like I know like we would have assemblies about like people being racist. Um, so like if I had a conversation about race, it was either with my friends about like, ooh, that was racist that guy said, um,
Mm-hmm.
or it was like um, just uncomfortable talking about like what had happened. So it was never like trying to resolve anything. It was essentially like, ooh, that was bad.
Mm-hmm. So, was there a point in your life whenever you actually started to see yourself as a race rather than just, a blank slate? Or when was that?
Um, well, like my family is entirely Irish. Um, like I'm sorry, people keep texting me. I don't know why. It's 8 a.m. But like we're entirely Irish, so it's not like oh, like hey, like here's like the British side of me, here's this side of me. Um, so for a while, like everything for me was just like, oh yeah, you're Irish. Um, and then I think I was forced to like reckon with what that meant, like during history
Mm-hmm.
classes, when people would be like, oh, like we were the enslavers, and they'd be like, you should all like feel bad, um, and like my family came here from Ireland like barely like 70 years ago, like
Mm-hmm.
at best. So like I mean there was always like the kind of conversation of like what did happen in the past. Like I am white and I am like in a position of privilege, but I think like whenever like I would assign a race to myself, I'd be like, well, I'm different from those white people because my family's Irish. Like we were treated badly, like not nearly as badly as slaves, but like there was always like that, like we're different from these white people. So I think there was kind of a divide there in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever witnessed any racism in your life?
I definitely have. Um, I did grow up in like a neighborhood on the south side of town. I didn't interact with anyone, but obviously, like, you know, like you see things on the street. Um, and then, like, in high school, like, people would write, like, the N word on bathroom stalls. Um, so then, like, that was a problem. But also, for a while, I did date a black guy. And, like, my mom was like, really? You're dating a black guy? Like, there was always, like, questions from people about my choices.
So you already talked about your Irish background a little bit. So how do your other identities or social positions like gender, class, religion, how do they shape your experience like in tandem with race?
Yeah, I think one thing for me that like really got me like outside of that, like I'm different from these white people. Like I think one thing that got me like out of that mindset was like coming out. Because like when you're like, I don't know like how to explain it, but like when you're in the closet, you kind of tend to like follow social norms so nobody knows. Um, but like when I came out, like the people that around me that knew about it, like they were like, oh, I have someone you might like to meet. And then I think that like through like the LGBT community, like there was a way to like find other people that aren't just like those like Christian white, like we grew up in this nice little like happy-go-lucky whitewashed town. So I think coming out definitely changed that. Because like if you want to talk about Catholicism, I definitely don't think that's something that's going to be like a bastion of acceptance. Um, so yeah, like I think coming out is really something that like I had to do um, to like escape that kind of my own prejudice, I guess.
Okay. So how have the events of 2020, the pandemic and the activism surrounding the killing of George Floyd and the election and all that other stuff that's going on this year, how have they shaped your perception of racism and anti-racism in the U.S. going along with that?
Yeah, that's a good one. Because like in 2015, 2016, when Black Lives Matter was first like coming up, um, like obviously I was in a white Christian high school, so there was really nothing, like like there was really like no recognition of it. Like obviously like I'd put on my story like, hey guys, like don't be racist, but I mean that's like always the slacktivism. And I think in 2020, like with the pandemic and with the protests, and also like being older now, more educated, I think there was always like this idea, like at least like in May through June and everything, um, that like I had to do something because like I was informed now, like I wasn't ignorant. So like for a while I did go out and protest. Like I like I got tear gas like everyone else, like we were fleeing from rubber bullets. Like I mean I was out there, but I don't know how much of that like was me angry about George Floyd or me just trying to do something. Because like I hadn't done anything in the past. Like obviously the killing was unjustified, but I definitely think that there could be something said about like, oh, I wanted to make up for what I hadn't done.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you talked about that you've gone to protests, and that was going to be a little bit of the next question. Have you been involved in any anti-racist actions or activities this year? So if that's the protests or something else that you did, can you like elaborate on that?
Yeah, so um, when everything first hit, um, like about George Floyd, and people were like, okay, time to protest again. Because I mean, protests have never ended since Black Lives Matter started, but obviously they're going to get more recognition when something bad happens. So when everything hit, the first thing I did was like go on Twitter and search like protest near me, because Twitter knows everything apparently. And so like I found the links, I was retweeting them. And the first one I tried to go to, I got stopped in traffic because they had blocked all the streets in downtown Fort Wayne. And so my car was stopped, and I was like, well, I can't just like leave it in the middle of the road and get out and protest with people. So I was kind of foiled there. So then the next day I took a different route. But like for at least like 3 or 4 weeks, like it was just like bouncing around different protests. The Fort Wayne ones got extremely violent, and they wouldn't even like let us go back, even though they were peaceful, like standing on the courthouse lawn, which is completely legal. Like they were made very violent, so we weren't able to go back. And so I would like bounce to Indy, or like I have friends in Columbus and Cincy. So like we would make a day of it. Like it'd be like, oh, I can visit you and we can protest. And like we made a ton of signs. Like I went out and I bought canvases so that we could reuse them. And like we all have them in our apartments now. Like we just made signs. But like it was just like crazy trying to like navigate everything, because like suddenly this city doesn't want you there. Indy had a curfew, so like you would have to protest like from only like 11 to 1. So it was definitely something that was like a balancing act.
Yeah.
But that's most of what I did for like anti-racism, other than, you know, posting on my story. But I think everyone kind of does that if they're not a bad person.
Yeah. So, how would you describe what you've seen of race relations or race issues at Ball State?
I think I would have said something different before last year, because like my freshman and sophomore year, like everything was kind of like really cool. Like coming from a private Catholic school to this big public university, I was like impressed with like the numbers we had, like to like combat how white Indiana is. Like we definitely had a lot of people of color. Like I saw a lot of diversity in classes. So I was like really impressed, and like everyone seemed to get along. I never saw anything that was like, oh, there's like active racism here. But then like after last year with the Breonna situation, like that was definitely something that was very sketchy. And so I kind of like took some time to like re-examine things. And then there was like, during the runoff election for SGA Senate, one of the people had someone come out against them and say like, hey, they were extremely racist to me my freshman year. And I had to like transfer dorms. I don't even go to Ball State anymore because Ball State didn't do anything when I reported her. Like there was more and more that kept coming out that I was like, oh, so they're like just like silencing people. That's why it seems so welcoming. Yeah. And then I think this year, definitely with the pandemic, like a lot of the ways that they handled things were kind of classist. And I'm not saying that just like being like non-white, like I'm not saying that makes you like poorer, but like statistically, there's definitely a divide there. And so like with them moving completely online, like that definitely shut out students who maybe don't have Wi-Fi or don't have a personal computer. Mm-hmm. So I think like throughout the pandemic, I've seen them kind of like take this higher road. that like actually isn't a high road at all. And then I guess I was okay recently, like when like the trucks were everywhere, like the Trump trucks, and Merms came out and he was like, "Hey guys, this sucks. Don't do that anymore." But he did also silence it, like by saying like, "Well, there weren't any like guns. Nobody was violent, but still, like, don't do it." So like it's kind of like a mixed bag. Like I've seen good things here, but also I don't know how much of those good things are just from the university silencing bad things.
So on that note, do you think that Ball State does a good job of creating a culture of like belonging to the university, and why or why not?
I think they do a mediocre job. And that's something like that I wouldn't have said as a freshman or a sophomore. Because I think there is a community here. And one of the reasons I picked Ball State when I was touring different universities was that I felt like there was a community here and I didn't even go here yet. Because it is a pretty close-knit university. It's in like the second poorest district in Indiana. Like it feels like something that would be so welcoming and so open. But again, like when things come out, like more and more is said, and I learn more about like experiences that aren't just like those white kids. I'm kind of more and more disappointed. I think they do the best they can. Like I think the statements that Mern sends out, like with COVID, when he was like, "Hey, this is the people partying. You can blame me all you want, like send me death threats, but like, sorry, it's these idiots doing it." Or like when he called out the Trump trucks, I wouldn't expect like a non-inclusive university to call out like specifically one party leaning trucks. So I think it's a mixed bag. I think they choose when to respond well. Like the response to Breonna was not handled well at all. But obviously I brought up like the Trump trucks. Like I think that they try, but I think that they only try if they know that they can do it right. If they can't do it right, they just don't do anything at all.
So Ball State is a diverse place, sorry. But it's historically and predominantly a white institution. So how have you navigated that diversity / the whiteness since you arrived here?
I think one thing that helped like change like my perception from like being that like all white Christian thing, I think the biggest thing that changed that like at Ball State, like to make it more diverse, to like have me have conversations, was like simply just like having to attend classes in the honors college. And I know that's gonna sound like I'm just kind of like giving the honors college the praise they want to hear, especially for this course. But like I think the honors college, like a lot of what they do is for students who are diverse, like not just in race, but also like in their own personal identities. So like I think with classes like this and classes like 189, you kind of have to listen to like other perspectives, and there's so many other students that are there that you can learn so much from. I know like in like the 201 through 203 courses, like I learned so much just from the students that I wasn't like actually like getting from the texts. Like I was just getting all these people and these discussion-based classes. Like I had to listen, I had to reckon with what was going on in the world and with these kids.
So you talk about learning more from discussion than you really did from strict, assignments and exams and stuff. So do you think that the university should have more discussion-based classes, even if it's not a class you would ever think about having discussions in?
I think it would behoove the university to have more discussion-based classes, because I definitely know that like as a student, there are a lot of people who like learn better that way. like that's one thing I learned in education classes here, and I'm sure that's one thing you will learn. Like there are people who learn best from discussions, but like one of the like main draws of the honors college is they say, hey, these are discussion based classes, so you're going to have conversations about it. And that's one thing that's really interesting. Like our social studies and our like science courses that we take through the honors college are like kind of discussion based. Like they talk about how this impacts you and the world. Whereas other classes here, like if you just took geography 101, like it's just going to be, hey, this is what the world looks like. Put it on a map, take a test.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. So there's something to be said about like the benefits of having discussion-based classes, especially like because the honors college has done such a good job with them. But I like, again, I can't expect that from like Math 125.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So on that note, can you remember something specific or maybe something a little bit more vague that you have learned from another student that you don't think you could have learned from a teacher?
Yeah. Almost all of my teachers here have been white. I had my first non-white professor this year, my senior year. Wow. Like, but like in my first class that I took, so I guess like the first day, like first class, like 11 a.m. was Honors 201. And there was a student in there and she was Vietnamese, and she talked a lot like at length about like how it's so weird being here in America, because like all we talk about are guns and Jesus. And she was talking about like nobody talks about like the importance of other people, especially being Vietnamese that's coming from a collectivistic culture, to be here where it's individualistic. And she was just talking about that. She was like, you guys really don't care about other people. You just kind of care about how you look and what you're doing and trying to save your ass with a God that nobody else really believes in. And that was something that really got me thinking. I was like, how much of my existence is self-serving? And I think that was something that was really important as like a brand new college freshman, is like, am I being self-serving? Am I being like unfair to other people because I am in this individualistic culture, because I am like this, and this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, going back to Honors 199 specifically, what has this course like meant for you personally, like with your own personality and that kind of thing?
This course I think was really good for me at this point in my life, because like after attending the protests, like I definitely felt like I was like kind of just one of those people who was like, yeah, I attended the protests. And yeah, I didn't attend them for clout or anything. But I mean, at that point, like, what else can you do to say like, I care about Black lives? Because just putting it on your story is considered slacktivism. Talking about going to the protest makes it seem like you did it because you wanted to. Like just because like you wanted to like tell people about it. Mm-hmm. So being in this course, like having like the text, like how to be an anti-racist, like there's something to be said about like, this is how to make it like a daily thing and not just like oh, they killed George Floyd, oh, they killed Breonna. Like there's something to be said about like trying to make anti-racism like an actual part of your life. So that's something that I think this course really wanted to do, like talking about the reading that stuck out to me the most is the one about like the colleges being founded on slavery. Like, so there's something to be said about this class teaching me like what's like really going down. It's not just like police brutality. It's not just this. So there's something to be said about like trying to remedy that. And I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. So, what are maybe 2 or 3 things that you've learned this semester that you've kind of kept with you? You mentioned that one, so maybe 2 or 3 other things that you've learned that you just think about a lot or that you've kept with you and that have helped you in life.
One thing that like I think about a lot, it didn't necessarily come from this course, but definitely ties into this course. And that's like thinking about how, like, in red line districts, like, I mean, you're not going to see like white kids. But I myself, like, I didn't grow up in a white neighborhood. I didn't grow up in the suburbs because we couldn't afford it. We were below the poverty line. But I think like we were able to recognize that because we were like, oh, we're these white kids that didn't grow up like other white kids. And so there was this kind of like shunning of us because we were like the poor white kids. And I always took that as like, wow, we're the poor white kids. But like this class, like going in depth with like redlining and the effects of any number of issues that specifically target minority communities, like that made me like look back at like younger me who was like, yeah, no, we're poor. And like I kind of had to like say to my past self, like, God, like you said that. Like there's definitely issues here that aren't just like, oh, you were the poor white kid. Like, yeah, it was rare for you maybe, but like this is their lived experience. And this class made me look at that like, hey, these are the lived experiences of other people. Not everything is about what you have experienced.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you think you'll take with you when you're a senior? So when you graduate, go out into the world and get a career, what do you think something that you're going to take with you and use in your career or just your life?
Yeah, since I want to be a teacher, a lot of what I want to take with me is stuff that I will use in the classroom. And I think that this class did a good job like setting up like finding sources to talk about anti-racism, because we had a number of readings, like obviously we had one every week. So I think that there was a lot to be said there about like these objective readings about what's going on. And I want to teach English, so it's very easy to work that into a syllabus. So this class definitely like gave me like some prompts to like be able to try and remedy that in other students that might not like have really thought about their race or their place in the world, and might need to.
So what have you learned that has changed your perspective the most out of any other thing?
I think the thing that changed my perspective the most was definitely the university thing, because I already knew universities were kind of racist, especially like Ivy Leagues. Like a couple years ago when Harvard came out and they were like, well, we have specific percentages that we have to keep. So like we keep like 30% Asian. Like if we've already accepted this many students and we still have that 30%, like, sorry, I'm not going to accept you because we need 30% Asian, 30% white. Like when they came out and said that, like I was like, oh yeah, that's obviously messed up. But like looking at the sources that are like, hey, actually there are problems that run deeper than this because like these universities were founded on racism, like these are on the bones of slaves. Like that was something that like I actually had to find out. Like it's not just something that I got from watching like CNN in the morning. It was something that like I had to read and I had to learn about that. So I think all the texts in here were kind of stuff that goes beyond what you just hear. Because obviously one story is going to be sensationalized, but that one story is not the whole truth of it. So it's kind of like digging down, looking at the roots.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think it means to be an anti-racist?
I think a big part of anti-racism is being someone who's willing to act out. There are always like ways that you can't act out. Like there are like controlling families. There are social and physical consequences sometimes, like especially with the protests, getting tear gassed or them bringing out rubber bullets, or like the canisters. I think there were definitely consequences there. And there are some people who like can't risk it. So I think it's like being willing to go out and do something, or like being able to do something in the absence. of being able to do something. So like if you can't go out and protest, make signs for people. If you can't go out and protest, like make like Black Lives Matter masks so that people are safe out there, but like also like like that you're doing something. If you can't go out there, donate. So it's being able to find something in the nothingness. So if you're not doing anything now, like find a way to like make sure you can do something. Because if there's one thing that like a racist will do is they'll hide behind like, well, I'm not racist. Like, when have you ever seen me call someone the N-word? Like, it's kind of like this absence of doing something. Like, well, I never called anyone the N-word. I never lynched anyone. So I'm not racist, but there are like racist things that they still do. And so I think like being an anti-racist is doing something in that absence. It's not saying, well, I've never lynched a Black man, so I'm an anti-racist. It's, well, like, I couldn't protest, but I donated to this organization to try and like stop this from happening.
Mm-hmm. So, where do you see the U.S. 5 and 10 years from now when it comes to the Black Lives Matter issue or other issues of racism that are still going on in the country?
Yeah, I honestly see us in the same place. And that's really sad. Like I would have said this no matter who was elected, because Joe Biden's an extreme moderate, and then Kamala Harris is horrible to different minority communities, like trans communities, and especially like Black communities. Because there's always this idea of like people in like the persecuted group are harshest to other people in that persecuted group. Like there's like studies like that women are harsher against other women who dress more promiscuously. So there's something to be said about like Kamala and Joe not doing anything. Because Kamala, like, she was a prosecutor, she was a cop. Like, she's not going to try and like defund the police. She's not going to talk about like ACAB. And I'm not saying that you have to defend Black lives. But like, I think that there's like definitely something to be said about like, she's not going to try and do anything because the movement has come down to, hey, this is an issue within the justice system. And she was someone within the justice system. So like, it's not something that she herself, I think, is going to try and fix. And then Joe is just extremely moderate. He doesn't want to piss off one side and then not get reelected, or he doesn't want to piss off one side and then like end up in the news every day like Donald Trump. So there's like, I see us kind of in the same place, like at least 5 years from now. 10 years from now, I like hope that something will change. But with systemic issues, if we don't have someone who's willing to change that, and it doesn't seem like we do, then I don't really think that there's going to be much made.
Mm-hmm. So where do you see yourself 10 years from now personally, specifically with this issue?
Yeah. I'm hoping that like I'll like still be doing stuff. I don't expect like there to continue to be protests, like unless I go out and search for them. So it's not like I can like see myself 10 years from now like rioting. But like I hope that I'm still doing something. Like if there are still like these inequalities, if there are still like systemic issues, I want to be someone who's like out there changing it. Like if like I need to like talking about it to my students, like having those hard conversations with people, or just like donating, making sure other people donate, holding fundraisers. Like I hope that I'm doing something like that and not just like back to slacking like I was in high school.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that you will remember maybe the stuff that you learned in this class, or even the things that happened over the summer that changed your worldview or your perspective on Black Lives Matter and anti-racism? Do you think that you will think about that stuff a lot 10 years from now?
I think I will, especially with like the stuff from this course, because I think like, as I said earlier, like a lot of the stuff that Bartlett had us read, I think is something that like I could use in a classroom, because it's not something that's saying like, oh, hey, like vote Democrat because like we're not going to do this. It's stuff that's like, hey, this is an issue that's happening in America. This is why it's happening in America. Tell me how you can fix it. It's not saying like go left-leaning and defund the police. It's not saying go right-leaning and say like, no, don't defund the police, just like address the issue. Like none of it actually says that. It just says like, hey, this is an issue, you have to solve this. And so I think like a lot of the text that he sent, I'll try to use in the classroom. And then like, you know, once they're outdated, like finding stuff that builds on that. So I think like I will be thinking about this class because like he has a lot of text that I want to be able to use and teach. And then like the protests, like I don't think I'm gonna forget those. Like I don't think you can forget like the feeling of like tear gas. Like that hurts.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot there. Like you can't really forget.
So, on that note, you said that you're an English secondary education major, and you already talked a little bit about how you are going to use some of these sources that we've read over in this class with your students. But what are some other things that you think you might do in your classroom to help spread knowledge about anti-racism and help your students be accountable or just be good people in that sense?
I really like, I don't know like what the definition of like a good person or like an effective person is, because I think for everyone it's something different. Like I'm sure that there are people who are going to look at me and say like, well, you protested for a couple weeks, but there's still protests going on, so why aren't you doing more? And there are going to be people who like look at me and say like, wow, you're doing a lot. And like, I'm not, like, I'm just doing stuff. Like I don't see myself as a good or bad person. So I don't know if I'm like the right person to like define like what would be a good person, what would be acting morally justly. Because I don't even know like if I'm doing anything right. So I don't know if I can tell like this is how you do something right.
Mm-hmm. So, is there anything like specific besides sharing those sources that you were talking about that you would maybe incorporate into your everyday routine with your students? Let's say that, like, rather than just curriculum, maybe just like the way that you speak to your students or how you interact with them.
Yeah, that's one thing like we've been addressing like every year here at Ball State. That's one of the reasons why like freshman and sophomore year I thought like Ball State was so inclusive, because like a lot of the classes you have to take multicultural education, you have to take multicultural communication. Like there's so many classes built into like the education program here that like are made to like help you address like, hey, this is what's going on. Please don't be a racist if you're going to be a teacher. And like that's something that like definitely is going to go through like to my career, is like addressing, hey, here's what you said, maybe don't say that again. So like addressing how students interact with each other, but especially like being able to address like, I know like I'm standing in front of you like a white woman, and like I can't understand everything you're going through. Like being able to address that. In linguistics courses here, like we talk a lot about like AAVE, and addressing like there is no real standard English, because what people learn, like if you grow up speaking AAVE, you're not going to come into a classroom and then immediately like know how to write a paper like everyone else. And should you even have to, because like academic writing is slowly becoming more and more like the common man's vernacular. So like there's a lot to be said there about like accepting like not everyone is going to grow up speaking like that prim and proper academic writing English. So how do you address that? How do you try and make up for that gap? I think like this course, like, yeah, obviously there's going to be the text, but I also want to like be able to meet people where they're at.
Mm-hmm. So on that note, is there anything else that I haven't asked you about that you want to talk about, or anything else you'd like to touch on?
I don't think so. I think you covered a pretty good like range of things. Because like everything, I think, especially for me as a senior, like I think everything is going to tie back to what am I going to do next? Because you have 4 more years, unless you're going for a master's or anything. But like, there's this idea of like I have to go out into the real world and I have to do something. There's no buffer between college and life unless you just take more college. So I think with you focusing on like how are you going to actually use this, I think that was something that like is what mostly I needed to talk about.
Mhm. Okay, well, thank you so much for talking with me today. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day, and thank you. Bye.
Yeah.